You see this trampoline right here? Me and my daughter noticed that just after a few months of having it, the grass under it is completely dead, while the grass around it is still thriving. And why is that? It's because the trampoline was blocking the sun and the rain from getting into the grass that was under the trampoline. So therefore, the grass around it was thriving and growing as usual, but then the grass that was blocked from any water and from any sunlight died. And my daughter and I were reflecting on the concept of imagine our hearts without the Quran and without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's remembrance. That just like this grass died so easily, just months after being covered by a trampoline, our hearts without remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are similarly dead, are similarly not thriving the way they can, and they end up lacking the potential they have. And when our heart is lacking potential, then consequently, all our senses are also lacking potential because our senses are very much connected to our heart. And there's an ayah that says this in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us there are people that as soon as they hear the ayat, the verses that is recited upon them, the verses from Allah, they immediately are affected and pulled to tears and make sujood, just prostration out of the awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the verses. And sometimes you can say, well, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with my heart? Why am I not affected? And that is like the grass that has not been thriving. It's not affected anymore. Because Allah right away says, فَخَلَفَ مِن بَعْدِهِمْ خَلْفٌ أَضَاعُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَاتَّبَعُوا الشَّهَوَاتِ. That there will be people who come after these people who forget and neglect connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, neglect their prayers, and they just do whatever they want, whatever their hawa, their desires want. And thus, their heart is no longer affected to the point that they perceive the verses and they're affected by it, to the point that they can be emotional and in tune and have this connection with it. And that's why it's so important to be constantly connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what's interesting is that this entire reflection started just from reflecting on the trampoline and what happened to the grass under it. And what's beautiful is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the entire universe, the entire world around us in a way that if we reflected upon it, we would constantly have these reflections. Imagine everything you see around you pulls you to reflect on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and your connection to Him. And that's indeed how the universe is built. Allah tells us in the end of Surah Ali Imran, in verses that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam encouraged us to reflect on, where Allah says that everything around us are signs for those of inner intellect. And who has inner intellect? It's one whose heart is connected to Allah with their core. At their core, they remember Allah. They're so attached to Allah, therefore everything reminds them of Him. Imagine to be such people who are in tune with their Creator, that everything reminds them of Him. The other day I was biking with my friend and we both had our kids behind us in the hot sun. We finally got to the park, and in this park was this beautiful shade. So we immediately sat under it, and the minute we stepped under the shade, it was just raha, it was just complete comfort. And my friend and I were talking, imagine Yawm al-Qiyamah, when we're all looking for shade. When we're all looking for shade and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts you under the shade of people who loved each other for His sake, or from the people who were immersing themselves in the places of dhikr, places where He is remembered. So this scene of us biking and finally finding a place of shade reminded us of a scene of Yawm al-Qiyamah. And similarly, everything around us can remind us of realities that have to do with our connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, only if we reflect. May Allah make us from ulil albab, from the people who the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was pointing us towards. Reflect on these last verses in Surah Ali Imran as he advised us to. Go back to it. Are we from ulil albab? Are we people that when we see dead grass, it reminds us that we need the Quran to be showered, to shower our hearts and to revive our hearts? Are we people that when we see a shade outside, it reminds us, Ya Allah, shade us on the day that we need it most, on Yawm al-Qiyamah? May Allah truly make us such people where everything around us reminds us of Him. Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen.